The Second World War witnessed the rise of one of history's most notorious military organizations. The Waffen-SS, initially conceived as the armed wing of Nazi Germany's Schutzstaffel, evolved into what Adolf Hitler considered his most elite and unbreakable military force. These units, bound by ideology and extreme combat training, became synonymous with both military effectiveness and horrific war crimes. Between 1939 and 1945, the Waffen-SS grew from a few regiments to a force of nearly 1 million men organized in 38 divisions. They fought on every major front of the European war, from the frozen steppes of Russia to the beaches of Normandy, from the deserts of North Africa to the streets of Berlin. Their story is one of military prowess, intertwined with ideological fanaticism and criminal brutality. This documentary examines the Waffen-SS not to glorify but to understand, to analyze how such formations emerged, operated, and ultimately fell. We explore their origins, their most famous divisions, their tactics and equipment, and most critically, their role in the Nazi regime's crimes against humanity. This is their complete history. The origins of the Waffen-SS lie in the early 1920s, with the formation of Hitler's personal protection squad. The Schutzstaffel, or SS, was established in 1925 as a small elite bodyguard unit within the larger Sturmabteilung SA. After the Night of the Long Knives in 1934, when Hitler purged the SA leadership, the SS emerged as the dominant paramilitary organization in Nazi Germany. Heinrich Himmler, appointed Reichsführer SS in 1929, transformed the organization from a small bodyguard unit into a massive state apparatus. Himmler's vision was grandiose and sinister. He sought to create a racial elite, a modern order of Teutonic knights, bound by blood, ideology, and absolute loyalty to the Führer. Every aspect of the SS, from recruitment to training to symbolism, was designed to reinforce this identity. The black uniform, introduced in 1932, set SS men apart visually and psychologically. The death's head insignia, adopted from Prussian military tradition, symbolized their willingness to die for their cause. The twin lightning bolts of the SS runes became one of history's most recognizable and feared symbols. The motto, Meine Ehre heißt Treue, my honor is loyalty, encapsulated the absolute obedience demanded of every SS man. Recruitment standards were exceptionally strict. Applicants had to prove pure Aryan ancestry, meet rigorous physical standards, and demonstrate ideological commitment. Height requirements were initially set at 5 feet 10 inches minimum, later relaxed only when wartime demands necessitated. Dental health, vision, and physical fitness were all meticulously examined. Even minor defects could result in rejection. By the late 1930s, the SS had evolved into multiple branches: the Allgemeine SS, General SS, the SS Totenkopfverbände, or concentration camp guards, the Sicherheitsdienst, intelligence service, and crucially, the SS Verfügungstruppe, SSVT, the armed formations that would become the Waffen-SS. Each branch served the regime's totalitarian and racial objectives, but the armed SS would become the most visible in combat. The SS Verfügungstruppe represented Himmler's ambition to create a military force independent of the Wehrmacht and directly loyal to Nazi ideology. Formed in 1934, the SSVT initially consisted of 3 regiments: Deutschland, Germania, and the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. These units were full-time soldiers, unlike the part-time General SS members. Training for the SSVT was deliberately more brutal than Wehrmacht training. Physical conditioning pushed men to their limits and beyond. Live-fire exercises, where soldiers maneuvered with bullets intentionally fired close to them, were standard. The psychological goal was to eliminate fear and create automatic obedience under stress. Casualties during training were accepted as necessary for forging warriors. Political indoctrination formed an integral part of SS training from the beginning. Recruits received extensive education in Nazi racial theory, the history of the Germanic peoples, and the supposed Jewish Bolshevik threat. The concept of Lebensraum, living space, and Germany's destiny to dominate Europe were core teachings. SS men were taught they were racial aristocrats with a mission to secure the future of the Germanic race. The relationship between the SS VT and the Wehrmacht was complex and often hostile. Traditional military officers viewed these political soldiers with suspicion and disdain. Wehrmacht leadership worried about resource allocation, command structure conflicts, and the SS's lack of conventional military discipline. General Ludwig Beck and other senior officers opposed the formation of armed SS units, seeing them as private armies accountable only to Hitler and Himmler. Despite Wehrmacht opposition, Hitler strongly supported the SS VT's expansion. He saw value in having military forces that were ideologically reliable and personally loyal to him, rather than to traditional military institutions. The SS VT's performance in small operations and maneuvers impressed Hitler, reinforcing his confidence in their potential. By 1938, the SS VT had grown to 3 full regiments plus supporting units, totaling about 18,000 men. They participated in the annexation of Austria and the occupation of Czechoslovakia, gaining experience in military operations without combat. These deployments also demonstrated the SS VT's role as an instrument of Nazi territorial expansion and oppression. The invasion of Poland in September 1939 marked the SS VT's first real combat experience. SS units participated alongside Wehrmacht forces in the rapid conquest of Poland. Their performance was mixed. They displayed aggression and courage, but also suffered heavy casualties due to inexperience and reckless tactics. Wehrmacht commanders criticized their wasteful use of men and resources. During the Polish campaign, SS units also participated in atrocities against civilians and prisoners. The Leibstandarte was involved in massacres of Polish civilians, foreshadowing the criminal nature that would characterize much of their future operations. The ideological indoctrination that taught racial superiority translated immediately into brutal actions against inferior populations. After Poland, Hitler authorized the expansion and official designation of these forces as the Waffen-SS, armed SS, in 1940. Several SS regiments were organized into full divisions: the SS Verfügungsdivision, the SS Totenkopf Division, and the Leibstandarte remained a reinforced motorized regiment. Additional divisions were authorized for formation. The invasion of France and the Low Countries in May 1940 provided the Waffen-SS with opportunities to prove themselves against professional Western armies. The Leibstandarte, attached to the Wehrmacht spearhead, advanced rapidly through the Netherlands and into France. They captured key objectives and demonstrated the aggressive spirit that would become their hallmark. The Totenkopf division, despite its sinister origins as concentration camp, guards reorganized into a military unit, fought effectively in France. At one point, they held off a British counterattack near Arras, preventing a potential disruption of the German advance. However, the division's commander, Theodor Eicke, instilled brutal methods that led to the massacre of British prisoners at Le Paradis. The Wehrmacht's stunning victory in France validated Hitler's confidence in mobile warfare and his willingness to take risks. It also elevated the Waffen-SS's status. Hitler was pleased with their performance and authorized further expansion. The success in France, despite high casualties, gave SS commanders confidence and increased their political leverage for resources and autonomy. By the end of 1940, the Waffen-SS had expanded to include several divisions and was preparing for even larger operations. Recruitment standards were maintained for ethnic Germans, but the organization was also beginning to accept Germanic volunteers from occupied countries. The next phase of expansion would come with Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler held a unique position as Hitler's personal military unit. Originally formed as a battalion-sized bodyguard in 1933, the LSSAH expanded into a regiment, then a brigade, and ultimately a full panzer division by 1943. Its commander, Josef Sepp Dietrich, was an old Nazi party member and Hitler's personal friend, which guaranteed the unit's elite status and preferential treatment. Dietrich personified the contradiction of the Waffen-SS leadership. A brave soldier and effective leader of men, he was simultaneously a convinced Nazi, a war criminal and, by professional military standards, a mediocre tactician. His loyalty to Hitler was absolute, and Hitler returned that loyalty with resources, decorations, and protection from criticism. Wehrmacht generals despised Dietrich, but had to cooperate with him due to Hitler's favor. The Leibstandarte fought in every major German campaign. In Greece in 1941, they executed a daring assault on the Klissura Pass, demonstrating mountaineering and infantry skills. On the Eastern Front, they participated in the initial advances of Operation Barbarossa, fighting in the advance on Moscow and later in the battles around Kharkov. The Battle of Kharkov in March 1943 represented one of the Leibstandarte's most significant military achievements. As part of SS Obergruppenführer Paul Hausser's SS Panzer Corps, the LSSAH participated in the recapture of Kharkov from Soviet forces. The city changed hands multiple times in brutal urban combat before German forces secured it. This victory temporarily stabilized the southern sector of the Eastern Front after the Stalingrad disaster. At the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, the Leibstandarte formed part of the SS Panzer Corps, the most powerful German formation committed to the offensive. Equipped with Tiger tanks and the new Panther tanks, the LSSAH pushed deep into Soviet defenses. However, massive Soviet reserves and Hitler's decision to call off the offensive meant that tactical successes brought no strategic gains. The Leibstandarte's combat record cannot be separated from its extensive war crimes. In addition to the Wormhout massacre in France, the unit was implicated in numerous atrocities on the Eastern Front. The ideological indoctrination, emphasizing racial superiority and the subhuman nature of Soviets, led to routine murders of prisoners and civilians. In December 1944, the reconstituted LSSAH participated in the Ardennes Offensive, Battle of the Bulge. The 1st SS Panzer Division, as it was now designated, formed the spearhead of the 6th SS Panzer Army's attack. Elements of the division committed the Malmedy massacre, murdering 84 American prisoners of war. This atrocity, discovered as American forces counterattacked, ensured that LSSAH soldiers faced little mercy when captured. By 1945, the Leibstandarte was a shadow of its former strength, though still bearing its prestigious name. The final major operation was the Lake Balaton offensive in Hungary in March 1945, a futile attempt to protect Hungarian oil fields. After this failure, Hitler allegedly ordered the LSSAH to remove their cuff titles in disgrace, though this order was largely ignored by the division. When the war ended, surviving LSSAH members desperately tried to reach Western Allied lines. Dietrich himself surrendered to American forces and was tried for war crimes. He served 10 years in prison for the Malmedy massacre and received an additional sentence from a German court for his role in the Night of the Long Knives. He was released in 1959 and became a symbol for unrepentant SS veterans until his death in 1966. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich was one of the most combat-experienced formations in the entire Wehrmacht. Originally formed as the SS Verfügungsdivision in October 1939, it fought in France, Yugoslavia, and extensively on the Eastern Front. The division earned both military respect for its fighting capability and eternal infamy for war crimes. Das Reich participated in Operation Barbarossa. From the first day assigned to Army Group Center, the division advanced through Brest, Litovsk, Smolensk, and toward Moscow. The brutal combat of 1941 forged Das Reich into a formidable fighting formation. Like other German units, they suffered terribly in the first Russian winter, but emerged hardened and experienced. In 1942 and 1943, Das Reich participated in defensive and offensive operations across the southern sector of the Eastern Front. They fought in the recapture of Kharkov and at Kursk, where their Panzer Regiment achieved impressive tactical successes. The division's tank units, equipped with Tigers and Panthers, made it one of the most powerful armoured formations available to Germany. The division's tactical proficiency was undeniable. Das Reich developed effective combined arms tactics, integrating panzers, panzer grenadiers, artillery, and engineers into coordinated operations. Their ability to launch powerful counterattacks and then transition to defense made them valuable for stabilizing crisis situations on the Eastern Front. However, Das Reich's military accomplishments are forever overshadowed by their atrocities. Throughout the Eastern Front, the division participated in anti-partisan operations that routinely killed civilians, destroyed villages, and committed massacres. The ideological nature of the war against the Soviet Union gave SS units license for extreme brutality. In June 1944, Das Reich was stationed in southern France when the D-Day invasion occurred. Ordered to move north to Normandy, the division faced harassment from French resistance forces. The SS response was characteristically brutal. On June 9, 1944, elements of Das Reich entered the village of Oradour-sur-Glane. At Oradour-sur-Glane, Das Reich soldiers massacred 642 civilians, including 247 children. The men were machine-gunned in barns, while women and children were locked in the church, which was then set ablaze. Those who attempted to escape were shot. The entire village was burned. This atrocity, one of the worst committed in Western Europe, exemplified how ideological indoctrination translated into criminal brutality. The massacre at Oradour-sur-Glane was not an isolated incident. Das Reich committed similar atrocities at Toul and other locations during their movement north. After the war, surviving officers faced trials, though many sentences were commuted or reduced during the Cold War. The division commander, SS Brigadeführer Heinz Lammerding, escaped justice entirely, dying peacefully in West Germany in 1971. Das Reich fought in Normandy and later in the Ardennes before ending the war fighting Soviet forces in Austria. The division's combat record demonstrates the Waffen-SS paradox: tactical proficiency and military effectiveness placed in service of the most criminal regime in modern history. The 3rd SS Panzer Division Totenkopf had the most sinister origins of all Waffen-SS divisions. Unlike units formed from volunteers seeking military service, Totenkopf was created from concentration camp guard units the SS Totenkopf Verbände. These men had spent years brutalizing prisoners in camps like Dachau, Sachsenhausen, and Buchenwald before being organized into a military division in 1939. The division's first commander, Theodor Eicke, personified everything brutal and fanatical about the SS. Eicke had organized the concentration camp system and personally developed the harsh methods used there. He viewed conventional military discipline as weakness and instead emphasized absolute hardness, ruthlessness, and contempt for enemies. Eicke's leadership style created a division that was both tactically effective and criminally brutal. During the invasion of France in 1940, Totenkopf units committed the Le Paradis massacre, murdering 97 British prisoners of war. This atrocity, like many others, resulted from Eicke's teachings that emphasized showing no mercy to enemies. Wehrmacht officers who witnessed such acts often protested but had no authority over SS units. On the Eastern Front, Totenkopf fought with characteristic aggression and suffered appalling casualties. In the Demyansk pocket encirclement of 1942, German forces, including Totenkopf, held out for months surrounded by Soviet troops. They were supplied by air while fighting desperate defensive battles. The division's performance in this crisis enhanced its reputation, though at a terrible cost in lives. Eicke was killed on February 26, 1943, when his reconnaissance aircraft was shot down over the Eastern Front. His death removed one of the most notorious SS commanders, though his replacement maintained similar methods. The division continued fighting in major battles, including Kursk, where they formed part of the 2 SS Panzer Corps. Like other SS formations, Totenkopf's involvement in atrocities was extensive. Anti-partisan operations on the Eastern Front provided cover for massacres of civilians. The division's origins in the concentration camp system meant its members had already been conditioned to view certain groups as subhuman and worthy only of extermination. The 5th SS Panzer Division Wiking represented Hitler and Himmler's vision of a pan-Germanic military force. Formed in 1940, the division incorporated volunteers from Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, the Netherlands, and Belgium, alongside German personnel. This internationalization was based on Nazi racial theories that classified these populations as Germanic and therefore suitable for SS service. For Scandinavian and other Western European volunteers, motivations varied. Some were convinced fascists who supported Nazi ideology. Others were primarily anti-communist, viewing the coming war with the Soviet Union as a crusade against Bolshevism. Some sought adventure or economic opportunity. The SS recruitment propaganda emphasized the fight against communism rather than racial extermination, though this distinction meant little in practice. The division's first commander, Felix Steiner, was unusual among SS generals. A professional soldier who had served in World War I, Steiner emphasized tactical innovation and combined arms coordination over pure ideological fanaticism. He implemented training programs focusing on initiative, flexibility, and integration of infantry with armor and artillery. Steiner's methods made Wiking tactically proficient. Wiking fought exclusively on the Eastern Front from Operation Barbarossa onward. The division participated in the advance through Ukraine in 1941, fighting in the capture of Rostov and the push towards the Caucasus in 1942. They spent the winter of 1942–43 in the Caucasus region, where they faced Soviet counter-offensives. The division participated in the Battle of Kharkov and fought at Kursk as part of Army Group South. Throughout 1943 and 1944, Wiking was engaged in defensive battles as Soviet forces pushed westward. The division fought in Ukraine, Poland, and finally in the defense of Budapest in late 1944 and early 1945. Despite Steiner's relative professionalism, Viking units were implicated in atrocities on the Eastern Front. Anti-partisan operations killed civilians, and the division participated in the brutal warfare that characterized the German-Soviet conflict. The presence of foreign volunteers did not moderate the criminal nature of their operations. The foreign volunteers in Viking and other SS formations faced difficult circumstances after the war. Many were viewed as traitors in their home countries. Norwegians, Danes, and others who had served in the SS faced imprisonment or execution. Some found refuge in other countries, while others integrated back into society despite their service. Waffen-SS training represented an attempt to create the ultimate soldier through a combination of extreme physical conditioning and intensive ideological indoctrination. The training regimen was deliberately more demanding than standard Wehrmacht preparation, designed to forge absolute obedience, physical toughness, and willingness to sacrifice. Physical training pushed recruits to their limits. Long-distance runs with full equipment, obstacle courses, hand-to-hand combat, and endurance exercises were daily routines. Live fire exercises where soldiers maneuvered while bullets were fired intentionally close to them were standard in SS training camps. The psychological goal was to eliminate natural fear responses and create automatic obedience under stress. Recruits also underwent extensive training in small unit tactics. The SS emphasized initiative at the lowest levels, with squad and platoon leaders expected to make independent decisions. This decentralized approach, borrowed from German military tradition, proved effective in fluid combat situations. Combined arms training integrated infantry, armor, artillery, and engineers into coordinated operations. Political indoctrination formed an integral and extensive part of SS training. Education officers conducted daily lessons on Nazi ideology, racial theory, and the supposed threats facing Germany. Recruits learned about the Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy, the concept of Lebensraum, and the racial hierarchy that placed Nordic peoples at the pinnacle and Slavs, Jews, and others as Untermenschen, subhumans. This ideological education was not merely supplementary, but central to creating political soldiers, men who understood why they fought from the Nazi perspective. The curriculum included the history of the Germanic peoples, the supposed betrayal of Germany in World War I, and the mission to secure Europe for the master race. Anti-Semitic propaganda was constant and extreme. The indoctrination aimed to dehumanize future enemies, particularly on the Eastern Front. By teaching that Soviets were racially inferior and that Jews were orchestrating Germany's destruction, the SS created soldiers psychologically prepared to commit atrocities. This systematic dehumanization was a precondition for the crimes that followed. Tactically, the Waffen-SS developed several distinctive approaches. They emphasized aggressive offensive action, rapid exploitation of success, and willingness to accept high casualties to achieve objectives. SS units were often employed as thwart fire brigades, rushed to crisis points to launch counterattacks or stabilize collapsing fronts. This role suited their aggressive training and ideological motivation. The emphasis on combined arms coordination meant that SS panzer divisions could concentrate overwhelming force at critical points. Tigers and Panthers provided breakthrough power. Panzer Grenadiers exploited gaps, and artillery and air support, when available, suppressed enemy positions. These tactics, borrowed from German armored doctrine generally, were executed with particular aggression by SS units. However, the SS approach had significant weaknesses. The emphasis on aggression sometimes led to reckless attacks that wasted men and equipment. The willingness to accept casualties while demonstrating determination was strategically unsustainable. By 1943–44, Germany could not replace losses as quickly as the Allies, making such tactics increasingly problematic. The ideological component also created problems. The dehumanization of enemies led to atrocities that hardened enemy resistance and motivated Allied soldiers to fight harder. The refusal to surrender, even in hopeless situations, resulted in unnecessary deaths. The loyalty to Hitler and Nazi ideology prevented officers from making rational strategic decisions, as seen repeatedly in the final years of the war. The Waffen-SS, particularly elite panzer divisions, received priority allocation of Germany's newest and most powerful weapons. This preferential treatment was a result of Hitler's personal favor and the SS's political power within the Nazi state. By 1943–44, SS divisions were equipped with equipment that Wehrmacht units could only envy. The allocation of Tiger and Panther tanks to SS divisions was particularly significant. The Tiger Faust, armed with the devastating 88 mm gun and protected by thick armor, was nearly invincible in 1942–43. SS Tiger crews achieved extraordinary kill ratios, with individual tanks credited with destroying dozens of enemy vehicles. The Leibstandarte, Third Reich, and Totenkopf all received Tiger battalions that significantly enhanced their combat power. The Panther tank introduced in 1943 combined the Tiger's firepower with better mobility and reliability. SS Panzer divisions received Panthers in quantity, creating formidable armoured striking forces. At Kursk and in Normandy, these tanks demonstrated their effectiveness, though mechanical problems plagued early versions. Beyond tanks, SS divisions received preferential allocation of other weapons. The STG-44 assault rifle, the world's first true assault rifle, equipped SS infantry units before most Wehrmacht formations. This revolutionary weapon combined the range of a rifle with the rapid fire of a submachine gun, giving infantry tremendous firepower. SS units also received disproportionate allocations of the Panzerfaust anti-tank weapon, which gave infantry the ability to destroy even heavy tanks at close range. MG-42 machine guns, capable of firing 1,200 rounds per minute, provided devastating defensive firepower. The latest artillery pieces, armoured personnel carriers, and support vehicles all flowed to elite SS divisions. This preferential treatment caused significant resentment among Wehrmacht commanders, who watched their units struggle with obsolete equipment while SS formations received the latest weapons. The allocation decisions reflected political rather than purely military considerations. Hitler trusted the SS and wanted them to have every advantage. However, advanced equipment could not overcome strategic realities. By 1944, Allied material superiority was overwhelming. Even Tiger tanks, nearly indestructible in 1943, faced ever-improving Allied anti-tank weapons and overwhelming numbers. The sophisticated equipment required extensive maintenance and consumed fuel that Germany increasingly lacked. The mechanical complexity of German tanks also created problems. Tigers and Panthers frequently broke down, requiring extensive field maintenance. Fuel consumption was prodigious. A Tiger consumed hundreds of litres per 100 kilometres. As Allied air power dominated the battlefield, moving such vehicles in daylight became nearly impossible. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, launched on June 22, 1941, defined the Waffen-SS's wartime experience. This was the ideological war that Nazi propaganda had prepared for a racial struggle for living space and the destruction of Jewish Bolshevism. For the Waffen-SS, the Eastern Front became both their greatest battlefield achievement and the scene of their most horrific crimes. Multiple SS divisions participated in the initial invasion. The Leibstandarte, Das Reich, Wiking, and Totenkopf advanced alongside 3 million German troops. The early weeks brought stunning victories as Soviet forces reeled from the surprise attack. SS units captured thousands of prisoners, seized vast territories, and pushed deep into Soviet territory. The ideological nature of Barbarossa was evident from the beginning. Hitler's Commissar order directed that Soviet political officers be shot immediately upon capture. SS units complied enthusiastically with this criminal order. Behind the advancing armies came Einsatzgruppen death squads, which SS units often assisted in their genocidal mission against Jews, communists, and others deemed enemies. SS divisions distinguished themselves in several major battles of 1941. The Leibstandarte participated in the capture of Rostov, though they were soon forced to evacuate it during Soviet counterattacks. Das Reich fought in the advance on Moscow, coming within sight of the Kremlin spires before Soviet counteroffensives and winter halted the German advance. The first Russian winter of 1941–42 devastated German forces, including the Waffen-SS. Unprepared for the extreme cold, lacking winter equipment, and facing fresh Soviet reserves, German units suffered terribly. Frostbite caused as many casualties as combat. The Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS proved they could not simply defeat the Soviet Union in a single campaign as Hitler had expected. In 1942, German forces launched new offensives in southern Russia, aiming for the Caucasus oil fields and the city of Stalingrad. SS divisions participated in these operations, which initially brought significant territorial gains. Wiking fought in the Caucasus, while other formations supported the advance towards Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad became a turning point in the war, though no major SS formations were trapped in the pocket. However, the German defeat there reverberated throughout the Eastern Front. The initiative passed to the Soviets, and German forces would spend the rest of the war largely on the defensive. Throughout 1941–42, Waffen-SS units participated extensively in anti-partisan operations. These operations were often pretexts for massacres of civilians, particularly Jews. The ideological indoctrination that taught racial superiority and the subhuman nature of Slavs and Jews translated directly into mass murder. SS units burned villages, shot civilians en masse, and treated the entire Soviet civilian population as enemies. The Wehrmacht also committed excessive atrocities in front, but the Waffen-SS's involvement was systematic and enthusiastic. The distinction between combat soldiers and genocidal killers disappeared entirely in the East. SS men who fought bravely in battle also participated in mass shootings of civilians. After the disaster at Stalingrad, German forces in southern Russia faced potential encirclement. In February 1943, Soviet forces recaptured Kharkov, Ukraine's second-largest city, and threatened to cut off Army Group South. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein launched a brilliant counter-offensive using his mobile reserves, including the newly formed SS Panzer Corps under Paul Hauser. The SS Panzer Corps consisted of the Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf divisions, the three most powerful SS formations. These units, freshly refitted and equipped with new tanks, spearheaded Manstein's counterattack. In fierce fighting during February and March 1943, they pushed Soviet forces back and recaptured Kharkov. This Third Battle of Kharkov represented the SS's greatest operational success. The victory at Kharkov temporarily stabilized the southern sector and inflicted heavy casualties on Soviet forces. It also enhanced the Waffen-SS's reputation within the Wehrmacht, though many officers still resented their political privilege and questioned their tactical discipline. Hitler's confidence in his elite SS divisions grew stronger. The success at Kharkov set the stage for Operation Citadel, better known as the Battle of Kursk, in July 1943. This offensive aimed to eliminate a large Soviet salient, encircle massive Soviet forces, and regain the initiative on the Eastern Front. German forces included the most powerful armoured formations ever assembled, including 3 SS Panzer divisions. The SS Panzer Corps, now including Leibstandarte, Third Reich, and Totenkopf, formed part of Army Group South's attack force. Equipped with Tiger and Panther tanks, these divisions represented Germany's armoured elite. On July 5, 1943, they launched their assault against prepared Soviet defences. The SS Panzer Corps achieved the deepest penetration of Soviet lines during Kursk, advancing up to 30 miles and coming close to breaking through. Their Tiger tanks destroyed Soviet armour at incredible rates. Individual SS tank crews achieved remarkable kill counts. However, the Soviets had prepared multiple defensive lines and possessed vast reserves. As the offensive ground on, casualties mounted and the strategic situation deteriorated. Allied forces had landed in Sicily, threatening Italy. Hitler became convinced he needed to withdraw forces from Kursk to meet the Mediterranean crisis. On July 13th, he called off Operation Citadel, despite the SS Corps commander's protests that breakthrough was imminent. The Battle of Kursk marked the last major German offensive on the Eastern Front. Although German forces inflicted massive casualties on the Soviets, they could not replace their own losses. The initiative permanently shifted to the Red Army. From Kursk onward, German forces would fight a long, grinding retreat toward Germany. The retreat from 1943 onward transformed the Waffen-SS's role. Elite SS divisions became fire brigades, rushed from crisis to launch counterattacks and stabilize collapsing fronts. They fought in defensive battles across Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland. Their tactical proficiency remained high, but strategic defeat was inevitable against Soviet numerical and material superiority. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, several elite Waffen-SS divisions were positioned in France. The Leibstandarte, Third Reich, and the newly formed 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, were among the most powerful formations available to counter the invasion. Hitler's hesitation to release these Panzer reserves in the crucial first hours of D-Day allowed the Allies to establish their beachhead. The 12th SS Panzer Division. Hitlerjugend was one of the most unusual Waffen-SS formations. Composed largely of teenage Hitler Youth members born in 1926, led by experienced Eastern Front veterans, the division represented fanatical indoctrination meeting combat inexperience. These boys, barely trained but thoroughly ideologized, were thrown into battle against veteran Canadian forces. Hitlerjugend fought with suicidal determination. In the days following D-Day, they launched fierce counterattacks against Canadian positions near Caen. Their fanaticism shocked Allied soldiers. These teenage SS men fought to the death in situations where more experienced soldiers would have surrendered. The division was also implicated in the murder of Canadian prisoners at the Ardennes Abbey massacre. The fighting in Normandy was brutal and grinding. The hedgerow country of the Bocage region favoured defenders, and SS panzer divisions used every advantage. Allied air superiority meant that German forces could barely move in daylight. Artillery bombardments of unprecedented intensity devastated SS positions, yet the divisions fought on with characteristic stubbornness. The Leibstandarte SS Reich and other SS formations were engaged in constant defensive battles around Caen and throughout Normandy. They launched counterattacks to contain Allied breakouts and held positions long after Wehrmacht units had collapsed. Their tactical skill was evident, but material inferiority was overwhelming. In August 1944, Allied forces broke through at Avranches and began encircling German forces in the Falaise pocket. Hitler's refusal to authorize timely retreat trapped multiple divisions, including major SS formations. The attempt to escape through the narrowing gap resulted in catastrophic losses. The Falaise pocket became a killing ground. Allied aircraft and artillery pounded the trapped German columns mercilessly. Thousands of vehicles, tanks, and artillery pieces were destroyed or abandoned. The Waffen-SS divisions that escaped were shadows of their former strength, having lost most of their heavy equipment and thousands of experienced soldiers. The destruction in Normandy severely weakened the Waffen-SS. Divisions were withdrawn to Germany for rebuilding, but they never regained their previous strength. New recruits were less well trained, equipment was increasingly scarce, and fuel shortages limited mobility. Hitler's last major offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge, relied heavily on reconstituted Waffen-SS formations. The 6th SS Panzer Army, commanded by Sepp Dietrich, and including the rebuilt Leibstandarte and other SS divisions, formed the main striking force. Hitler envisioned splitting the Allied armies and capturing the vital port of Antwerp. Launched on December 16, 1944, the offensive achieved initial surprise. American forces in the Ardennes sector were weak and unprepared. SS panzer divisions advanced quickly in the first days, creating a large bulge in Allied lines. Hitler's optimism seemed briefly justified. However, multiple factors doomed the offensive. Fuel shortages immobilized German armor. Allied air power, once weather cleared after Christmas, devastated German columns. American resistance, particularly at Bastogne, proved far more stubborn than expected. The road network in the Ardennes could not support the massive movement of armoured forces. The offensive became infamous for the Malmedy massacre on December 17, 1944. A battle group from the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte, commanded by SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, murdered 84 American prisoners of war in a field near Malmedy. This atrocity, discovered as American forces counterattacked, hardened Allied attitudes towards the Waffen-SS. The massacre at Malmedy was not an isolated incident. Peiper's battle group murdered over 350 American POWs and more than 100 Belgian civilians during its advance. These crimes reflected the persistent brutality that characterized Waffen-SS operations, even in the West against fellow white Europeans, whom Nazi ideology ranked higher than Slavs. As the Ardennes offensive stalled and then failed, SS divisions fought desperate defensive battles. By January 1945, they were retreating back to Germany, having accomplished nothing except to waste Germany's last mobile reserves. The offensive's failure made the final defeat inevitable. As 1945 began, the Waffen-SS formations were fighting on all fronts in increasingly hopeless circumstances. In the east, Soviet forces pushed into Germany itself. In the west, the Allies crossed the Rhine River. SS divisions, still considered elite despite their depleted state, were thrown into futile counterattacks and doomed defensive positions. The final major SS offensive occurred in Hungary in March 1945. The 6th SS Panzer Army, including the Leibstandarte and other divisions, attacked near Lake Balaton in an attempt to protect Hungary's oil fields, the last significant petroleum source available to Germany. This operation demonstrated how divorced from reality Hitler's strategic thinking had become. The offensive at Lake Balaton quickly failed against strong Soviet defenses. Soviet counteroffensives then drove German forces back toward Austria. Hitler, furious at the failure, allegedly ordered the Leibstandarte to remove their cuff titles as punishment. The division largely ignored this order, demonstrating that even elite loyalty had limits when facing annihilation. In the final weeks of the war, Waffen-SS units fought with varying degrees of determination. Some formations continued fanatical resistance until literally wiped out. Others began surrendering or attempting to reach Western Allied lines to avoid Soviet captivity. The ideological indoctrination that had sustained them through years of war collapsed as total defeat became undeniable. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, surviving Waffen-SS soldiers faced uncertain fates. Those who surrendered to Western Allies were imprisoned, and many faced war crimes trials. Those captured by the Soviets often faced immediate execution or decades in the Gulag. The privileged status they had enjoyed evaporated instantly. Many SS veterans attempted to hide their service, removing their distinctive blood type tattoos and destroying identifying documents. However, Allied screening processes identified most former SS members. The scale of SS involvement in atrocities meant that collective guilt fell upon all members, regardless of individual actions. The Waffen-SS's combat record cannot be separated from its extensive involvement in war crimes and crimes against humanity. The ideological indoctrination that made them fierce fighters also led them to commit systematic atrocities across Europe. The historical evidence demonstrates that these were not isolated incidents, but patterns of behavior intrinsic to the organization. The Nuremberg Tribunal declared the SS, including the Waffen-SS, a criminal organization. This designation reflected overwhelming evidence of systematic involvement in genocide, mass murder, and other crimes. The tribunal explicitly rejected the argument that the Waffen-SS were merely soldiers following orders. Major war crimes attributed to Waffen-SS units included the massacre of British prisoners at Wormhout and La Paradis in 1940, extensive atrocities during the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Rodor-Saglane massacre in France, the Malmedy massacre in Belgium, and countless anti-partisan operations that were really campaigns of extermination against civilians. In the East, Waffen-SS units supported Einsatzgruppen death squads, participated in anti-Jewish actions, murdered prisoners of war systematically, and engaged in reprisal killings that targeted entire communities. The ideology of racial superiority taught during training translated directly into these criminal actions. Post-war trials prosecuted many SS officers and men for their crimes. The Malmedy trial convicted dozens of Leibstandarte soldiers. Various other trials across Europe addressed specific massacres and atrocities. However, many perpetrators escaped justice through death in combat, flight to South America or other refugees, or simply through the chaos of post-war Europe. The attempt by SS veterans organizations to rehabilitate the Waffen-SS's reputation in the post-war decades focused on military achievements while minimizing or denying criminal actions. These efforts emphasized that Waffen-SS soldiers were just like Wehrmacht soldiers, and that atrocities were committed only by concentration camp guards, not combat formations. Historians have decisively rejected these rehabilitation efforts. Evidence demonstrates systematic Waffen-SS involvement in crimes across all fronts and throughout the war. The organization's elite status was built on a foundation of racial hatred and genocidal ideology. Their combat effectiveness cannot be separated from their criminal nature. The Waffen-SS represents a cautionary tale about how military professionalism can be corrupted by totalitarian ideology. Elite soldiers given superior training and equipment became instruments of crimes against humanity precisely because their elite status was built on racial hatred and absolute loyalty to a criminal regime. The military effectiveness of elite Waffen-SS divisions resulted from multiple factors: selective recruitment, intensive training, superior equipment allocation, strong unit cohesion, and tactical flexibility. These advantages were real and helped make formations like the Leibstandarte and Das Reich formidable opponents. However, these military advantages were systematically undermined by ideological fanaticism and criminal activities. The refusal to surrender in hopeless situations wasted lives. The commission of atrocities hardened enemy resistance and motivated Allied soldiers. The absolute loyalty to Hitler prevented rational strategic decisions. The Waffen-SS's story also illuminates how ordinary individuals can be transformed into criminals through systematic indoctrination. Most SS recruits were not sadistic monsters, but young men who underwent intensive ideological education that dehumanized entire categories of people. This process created soldiers psychologically capable of mass murder. The organization's evolution from a small bodyguard unit to a nearly 1 million-man army also demonstrates how totalitarian regimes create parallel military structures to ensure ideological reliability. Hitler never fully trusted the Wehrmacht and created the Waffen-SS. As a counterweight, this divided command structure and wasteful resource allocation contributed to Germany's strategic defeat. Post-war memory and myth-making around the Waffen-SS have been contentious. In Germany, efforts to whitewash SS history have been largely unsuccessful due to strong historical documentation and education about Nazi crimes. However, in some countries where foreign volunteers served in SS formations, more ambiguous memories persist. The Waffen-SS's legacy is ultimately one of military skill placed in service of history's most destructive ideology. Their tactical achievements are historical facts, but these achievements were intrinsically linked to criminal purposes. They fought effectively for causes that were morally indefensible and practically doomed. Today, the Waffen-SS stands as a subject that must be studied to understand totalitarianism, the sociology of military organizations, and the depths to which armed forces can descend when divorced from ethical constraints. Their history is not one to be admired, but one to be understood as a warning. The ruins they left behind, the memorials to their victims, and the historical record of their crimes far outweigh any tactical achievements. They were indeed elite in military terms, but they placed that elite status in service of genocide and totalitarian conquest. That is their ultimate and damning legacy.